In aesthetics, you can achieve really, really more remarkable results, but it comes to patient selection. Certain patients will respond really well to treatment and will come to you for that appointment and decide to go with £1,000, a £2,000 package, and you've made a hell of a lot of margin. If something doesn't work, and then you tell them why it didn't work, scientifically maybe, it's an excuse. That's probably the first question anyone ever asks about aesthetics.
Thanks for joining us today. We've got a special guest, Dr Thuva Amuthan. He has been here before when he was a trainee, and he talked to us about how he managed to attain MRCGP. How are you doing, Thuva?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
Today we're going to discuss about developing a portfolio career. You're a prime example of somebody who's managed to develop a portfolio career in dermatology. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I guess if you want to start and know me as a person first, I think we'll have to start right at the beginning. So I moved to this country when I was about 11 years old, second term of year 6, as an immigrant from Sri Lanka fleeing the war. And it was just me and my mum, single mother, in Croydon, South London, in a council household. And I got started at that age dealing with household things, like dealing with the bills, because my mum didn't know English. So that's how early I got, I guess in some ways, trained in life and general life, not academic life that we get taught in school these day and age. So I guess I would probably credit where I am today to most of the lessons I've learned from life like that.
You've learned a lot of things, and I understand that you've managed to take a lot of that skills to use in your portfolio practice. Tell us, how did you think about starting a portfolio career?
The term portfolio is an interesting one, isn't it? I think most of us want to do what makes us happy. And I think that's what I always strive to do. Most of the time we're told what the train track to follow is. And I think early on in year 4 in medical school, I started questioning my choice of career. And I think that's what stemmed me on to explore other options avidly, completely outside the box. I didn't even look inside the box. I didn't want to be inside the box because it was clear to me that I wasn't going to fit inside the box. So that's when I started looking. And I think it's just life has led down some paths. Sometimes, I did a lot of promoting when I was at medical school, in terms of promoting student nights and networking. So that was always something that I was good at. I loved to meet people, hence why I chose the career in medicine, I guess, after all, right? You get the buzz from meeting people, speaking to people, helping people. So I developed that sort of outset. And then I think that gave me that entrepreneurial mindset to one, when people say no, not to accept it and prove a point and make it happen. I think that's probably why I'm here again, another one of the reasons that I'm here today. So then I guess when I did my foundation training, I think, as I'm sure everyone would agree, it's probably one of the toughest times in your life, even more tough than university first year probably. So then that really set that message home I need to look for other options, and I need to decide how my life is going to be. I'm done with people telling me how it's going to be. And I think that's what set me on that trajectory of exploring portfolio career as the only choice for me.
So you felt that you wanted some autonomy in your career, and you felt that you had to design your own career rather than having a default career path that other people might impose on you to some extent. So tell us then, how did you go about choosing which career path to take, as in now you're doing dermatology as well? So how did that come about?
I'll be honest with you on that one. That's been a multi-long pathway. Only recently have I decided to focus on dermatology and Dr Derme's Skin and Aesthetic Clinic as my go-to thing that I'm going to put all my eggs in to make it happen, because I think, as most of us probably do, we all have some neurodivergent traits in us, and I think I'm pretty ADHD. The problem being is that sometimes I'm good at those things as well. Then people ask you, and it's hard to say no. And I think that's always been my problem. So I've gone from party politics to business strategy consulting to my NED job in the NHS where I do governance, to ICB jobs or CCG jobs, or whatever you want to call them, to doing taxi medicals, occupational health, to dermatology. And I think if I was to give myself any advice, I think I would probably not discourage that. I think you have to try them all out to know what will work for you. What can you do for long? Because sometimes some things you might enjoy, you can't enjoy for long because they get repetitive. And so I think the key message you have to answer, what can you do for long enough that you will still want to turn up to work and do it again, and you'll still be happy about it, or you can build on and grow into something that's greater, that you'll be proud of. I think that's the questions you have to answer, and that only comes by exploring your options. So explore every single option that you can think of, and then work through a process of deduction to determine what one you want to focus on. And because the sooner you do it, the better, because we know, results, just like interest, is compounded. So the earlier you start, the better. So my dermatology aesthetics things, I started when I was an ST1 trainee, but it was very much a back burner thing for in fact, probably until a year ago, I'd say. So we're talking 4 or 5 years. It was on the back burner, but I was doing social media a little bit here. I was building on courses, developing as an injector, developing as a dermatology expertise. So then now, when I open the floodgates and I focus all on it, I'm ready to do most of the things without having to be unsure or questionable or anything like that.
Did you have any strategies from the beginning as to how you're going to build that practice?
This is probably one of the harder things to figure out. I think there are lots of strategies people use in building a portfolio career. I think the biggest hurdle is getting started, getting your foot in the door. And most of the times that is at your own expense in terms of time, being the biggest expense, but also cost money-wise. So I had to shell out obviously £2,000-3,000 to do my aesthetic courses, and then I think the biggest lesson there was that you do have to set up on your own, because it's a catch-22. Some of the big clinics will hire you with no experience, but most people want to see some level of experience. So then that's when you get sort of a baptism of fire. When you set out on your own, you make your biggest mistakes and you learn your biggest lessons, and that sets you on a snowball path in terms to a success. And I have to be honest, I think most of it is trial and error. You figure things out as you go along, and that is how it's meant to be done. So don't be set back by that.
You talk about some lessons you've learned and making mistakes. Can you share a few examples that would be helpful to people so that we can learn from the mistakes that you've made?
Sure. And I think my biggest mistake was not going all in, or not giving it its due attention early enough. And I think that's one thing you have to decide early on is how, as in, if you don't give anything your full attempt, you can't say you've actually tried it to your full extent, and you can't know for sure whether it's for you or not. So I think that's one of my biggest mistakes I've learned from. So if you're going to do it, learn about it, figure out how someone else has done it in the industry, look at other people how they've managed to make it work, and replicate that and make it and add your own angle to it. Don't ever copy, because that's just not great. You always want to stand out, and it's always about the USP, unique selling point. What is it about you that people should come to you for? And do it well, and do it as much as you can in the spare time that you have initially. And that's number 2. As in, I would still recommend that you taper. Try it out and see if it works. And then when it's working and it's gained momentum, then make that jump. I think a lot of people struggle when they go quit all in and go all in. Some people it works, so it really depends on your personality trait. I think the other one is social media. I think consistency is the key. I've never, fortunately, that's one of my weaknesses. Consistency has never been one of my strengths, and I'm learning still today to be consistent. I think that's what I haven't done. Be consistent with your marketing attempts, the way you're building your business. Set small goals each week, each month, and make sure you accomplish them, because that will give you a positive feedback and you'll want to do more. Where instead of thinking there's going to be a queue outside the door tomorrow and there's going to be 100 people and you're going to make it big overnight. I think that's the biggest mistake people make in this industry. They think, if I do the course and set up tomorrow, I'm going to be a millionaire tomorrow. That's not how it works, unfortunately. There's a lot of graft that goes into it, and it's steady, slow progress. The people who understand that and set out on that path are the ones that are most successful.
So you have to be patient if you're growing a dermatology practice, and it's something that will take consistency. So tell us, what have you learned while building it in terms of your graph, and what have been really useful for you to apply?
I think the biggest lesson in private practice full stop is that, or business full stop for that matter, is how much of it is marketing, getting people to your door, getting that lead to the door. I think that's what is never even touched on in medical school or in any curriculum for that matter. And I think that's been the biggest lesson to me. And I think understanding that will stand you in good stead. I think the number one step to that is understanding storytelling. It's not about you. It's not about who you are. It's not about how good you are. It's about how you make the client or the patient feel, and how you're going to help them. That's what the story should be about. Not how glorious you are and what the world's expert you are. That's irrelevant. That's not marketing. That's you bragging about yourself. That doesn't count. It's about how helpful you're going to be for the patient. I think there's a book called Storytelling. So you should, if that's something you're interested in, you should read it, because it really goes through that in detail. It's about how they make the movies. The biggest movies are made, and how they're so successful because they place you as the Yoda in some respect. Not that I'm saying I'm Yoda, but you know what I mean. You're the guide, not the hero. The hero is always the patient, the client. I think that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is understanding that most of internet traffic, I think 25% of internet traffic comes from Google. So it's all about SEO, right? I think that's one thing people forget. I think you can't overly do it because you've got other things to look at as well. But I think it's good to understand it. Having a good website with good content helps, especially if it's video content. It's in this day and age, you can't not do video content. That's just, you're gonna struggle to make it. So I think that's number two. And number three is getting the systems in order and getting the support team around you to make it work. Systemize it, so that you have a process where people who want to make inquiries go this way, and people who make calls go this way, and leverage. You can't answer all the possible calls that are going to come through 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, because you're busy working in a clinic. So there are cheaper alternatives that are worth investing in. It might set you £100, £200 a month or a week to start off with, but it's worth its ounce in gold. Get that additional support so that you can grow, so that you can work on your business, not in your business. I'd probably say that those are 3 tips.
That's very insightful. So it sounds like you've managed to learn from these lessons, and by applying these, you have built some following and you're gaining some momentum. Tell us in the beginnings when you start. I suppose when you start, you might not be known, and it can be very discouraging. How did these days felt?
I think it's hard, isn't it? And again, I think we all have this imposter syndrome, if you want to call it that, right? Even when we make it, it's difficult. So I think one of our biggest lessons to switch off from over critiquing, over analyzing your competitors was, I think, stay in your own lane. I'm sure there's loads of videos online about staying in your own lane. Focus on what you're building. Everyone started somewhere. And the more time you spend looking at other people and saying, oh my God, they've done that, how am I ever going to get there? The more time you waste not doing anything to make yourself get there. I think I read a post on Instagram today. It's about anxiety. However, whatever level of anxiety you have, it never made the question or the solution come about any sooner. So it's not worth stressing about it. And so then I think the biggest tip for that is stop focusing on it and focusing on your lane and how you're going to get to the next step. And I think setting those small goals as to what do you want to do before you go to bed today? What do you want to have done? What small thing do you want to have done today, so that gets you closer to the goal? I think that's the most useful thing I've learned, because I do that. I have a tendency as well. I want to build this empire, and you end up scheming in your head, and you're like, oh my God, I'm nowhere near how, and it's almost catastrophizing, isn't it? Which is unhelpful in every way.
So often people try and figure out what's going to happen step number 16, 17, but they have to do step number 2 and step number 3. And if you're worried about step number 15 or 16, when you haven't done the basics and the foundation, then you're not going to get to that level. So I think that's really important to think about what you can do the next step to advance closer to your overarching goal. So in terms of the practicality then, what are the things that you had to do to set yourself up?
The first one you do is sign up to a course with a reputable company. And then you go into the course and they'll tell you everything that you need to do. And most of that involves getting your insurance and then getting your consumables, the things that you need to use for your practice, whether it's Botox, filler, PRP machines, whatever that is. And step number 3 is getting your patient and getting going. And then step number 3 is probably marketing and setting up your presence, actually. And step number 4 is getting going. And then step number 5 is probably building on that, okay? And taking that testimonials and taking that client experience and building that client into someone who is going to be a long-term client. I think that's one of the other things you have to learn in this industry, or you do learn, is that maintaining a client and keeping them on is a lot cheaper than trying to acquire a new client. I think it costs 3 times as much to acquire a new client as to keep your old client and service them for life, which is what's better. So it's always about customer service. And in the private practice, it is about what the patient wants, and they are at the center of it, and they can have what they want. Within reason. You still have to be an ethical medical practitioner. You still have to represent their best interests, and you still have to say no. And the luxury of medical practice is if you think that they need something, not just medical help, but maybe psychological help, you can point them in the right direction, and you can say no. If someone's making you uncomfortable, if they're, if you for any reason feel uncomfortable with that patient, you don't have to treat them. Just like the NHS, there is no duty of care. Unless they are your patient and you've already started treatment, then of course that duty of care and ethics remains, but you have the choice between your patients as to who you treat. And I think one of the lessons I would say is important is knowing your competence and staying within your competence as much as possible, because then everything is comfortable for you. As soon as once you're outside your competence, problems start coming up. So be sure that you're competent at what you're doing before you do it. And some of that, most things like Botox and fillers, when you come onto the courses, they will give you enough patience so that you're competent to go out there. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be confident. That's 2 different things. Confidence comes with practice, experience, and time. Competence, I would say, is different. Competence being medically qualified to do it.
That's a good point that you raise, ethical, here, because so much of the reputation is when you get patients referring somebody else to you. So doing something that you're comfortable and you think is in the best interest of your clients is very important, because sometimes people might take a shortcut and they optimize for a short-term gain, and then long-term that's going to damage them. Are you enjoying this video so far? If you want more insight every week, then you might be interested in Fulfill Friday. This is a weekly newsletter in which I share exclusive insights on things I'm thinking and what I'm working. This is what some subscribers of Fulfill Friday have said. Join over 700 subscribers so you don't miss out on exclusive insights every Friday. Click the link down in the description below. It's completely free. So tell us what are the common pitfalls that you've seen for people who are joining this and then they find that it's not for them?
I think the common pitfalls, just like in medicine, is expectations. I think you have to be reasonable with your expectations. Rome wasn't built overnight, and nothing is going to be built overnight. I think that's the biggest lesson. That's why I personally prefer the taper technique, where you start it, test it, see how it works, and slowly build it while you're, reducing something else somewhere else, whether that's clinical practice or otherwise. And I think that's the biggest flaw. And the other thing is, even when you're doing the courses, going all out with the courses, people spend thousands of pounds on courses. And, what you've got to understand is you have to do the basics well, and then you go do the advanced stuff, because then you're more likely to absorb what they're teaching you, and you're likely to get more out of it. And again, it depends on person to person and their preference and their teaching styles and things. I'm a person who prefers to do things, all in, but at a steady pace. I prefer to do one thing well and the next thing, gradually build on it. I'm not going to say I don't like speed either. If I could, I would do all of it. But you've got to factor it in. Some of these level 7 courses, we're talking about 7,000 plus. I don't have that kind of money to waste, because for all I know, I could do that foundation course and find that it's not for me. What am I going to do then? I've committed now. There's no going back. So that's one thing. And number 2 is that, like I said, you learn more if you take your time and build up the practice. Because in this industry, in outside of the NHS, you understand that it's probably 80% business, 20% clinical practice. So you mustn't forget that. And all of these courses focus mostly, as they should, on clinical practice. And there aren't enough resources out there to teach clinicians how to be 1, managers, 2, business people, and 3, marketeers, which is what's lacking, I think, which is what the gap in the market is. And I think that's what you need to learn at pace to get far in this industry quick enough.
Let's talk about the earning potential in aesthetic medicine. For somebody who is watching this and is interested, what would you say?
That's probably the first question anyone ever asks about aesthetics. And I think what we have to understand is it's a lifestyle choice. It's not a monetary choice. So I think the common saying goes, you give up a 9-to-5 job to work 24/7. And that's what aesthetic medicine is, because it's your business. So actually, I lie. There are options. Okay. One, you can work for a clinic and still do that 9-to-5. The clinic brings you the patients, you service the patients, you get paid an hourly wage plus 15% commission, and you go home. Nothing to worry about, right? Or the option number 2 is you set up your own business, own practice, and you do A to Z, everything in it, right? People tend to take the option number 2 mostly. With the avalanche of the new mega clinics with loads of chains across the high street, there is more of an opportunity to work in a clinic where you turn up and do the patients and get commission and go home. From that perspective, I guess it's maybe the same as GP, if not a little bit more, depending on what level of injector you are and how quickly you can inject. I think, but again, going back to what I said a few seconds ago, it's about being realistic. What you got to understand, this is business. Someone could come to you and see you for an appointment, and they can pay you, I don't know, £50, £75 for your appointment. Or most of the cases, some people do it for free. I don't know why, but they do. And not have any treatment. So you wasted that half an hour appointment, and you've not made any revenue. At the same time, someone could come to you for that appointment and decide to go with £1,000 or £2,000 package, and you've made a hell of a lot of margin. So it's very fluctuant, as all business is. So it really depends. Now, personally, the reason I chose it is for lifestyle and to be in control of what I do and to do what I enjoy. I wanted to be a surgeon. I wanted to be an orthopod. And I soon realized that wasn't going to happen in the NHS, and that wasn't where I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So then I guess in some ways that's why I like this, because it's very hands-on. I get to be hands-on. I get to make a change to people's life that is instantaneous. I guess in some ways it's the only place where you get that magic pill where you can fix someone's aging, volume loss in certain cases. So that's why I picked it. And yes, the potential is there. Potential is sky's the limit, really. But it's, again, going back to that critical point of, can you get the patient to the door? Because in the NHS, the line is infinite. There's an infinite demand. In aesthetic, there is zero demand at your door, and you have to build that demand. So that's what it's proportional to. And it's business, just like any business. You can be a small shop, or you can be a massive shop, or you can one day decide to become a chain, like laser clinics or therapy clinics, and make millions. So the sky really is the limit. But again, so is it in GP practice. You could set up a super federation and make it big.
It's important to set realistic expectations. So as you said, you could be earning more, but at the same time, there's more responsibilities, more work to do with it. And there's also that risk where you're investing and you might not get a busy practice. So tell us then, in terms of patients' expectation, then when they're paying you, there is that consumerism where patient wants something. And as a doctor, you have to be also working in the best interest. So what are the things that you've adopt in your practice?
I think that's one of your biggest lessons in aesthetic medicine, is that all the patients that come through the door have very high expectations in most cases. Some from social media influence that we've had with the Kim K's and likes, and some from Love Island. So that is the norm. See, that's the standard patient that you might see. So you have to be prepared for it in some ways. You have to recognize that they have high expectations first, and you have to set realistic expectations. You have to bring those expectations really, really, really down. Because if something doesn't work, and then you tell them why it didn't work, scientifically maybe, it's an excuse. If you tell them beforehand and you set the expectations realistically and didn't work, well, you told them beforehand. Right? You set realistic expectations. So it's important. And in aesthetics, you can achieve really, really more remarkable results, but it comes to patient selection. Certain patients will respond really well to treatment. Certain patients are probably not suitable for treatment, where they've had too much sun damage, too much volume loss. They might need a surgical option instead, not a non-surgical option that we use in aesthetic medicine. So it's understanding that. And that comes down to one, clinical experience, and two, being upfront and honest with the patient. And I think honesty is just undervalued still. I think there are lots of clinics that promise the world out there, and you really can't lose your ethics because it proportional to your reputation. Because if you promise the world for a patient and they don't get it, they're going to tell a lot of people about it. If you set realistic expectations and they get reasonable expectations, they'll be over the moon about it, and they'll be happy to recommend you to their clients. They'll be happy to do testimonials for you. And in this market, that's what counts: your reputation, your testimonials, video testimonial, before and after photos, and use that to speak to the patients when you're consulting. Use your before and after photos to set realistic expectations as to this is what you might expect, not what you see on TV or social media with the crazy stuff that's out there. And I think that's quite key.
How do you use leverage in your practice? As a doctor, we exchange our time for money. So in your practice, what are you doing to use leverage, Thuva?
This is probably one of the things that we're not taught a lot of, nor is anyone in medical school or school, full stop. And I think I read the book Leverage by Rob Moore, which changed my life. And I think everyone should read it. And I think that's probably where I understood that, even if you don't have that money, sometimes it's worth investing in someone who will take and do tasks that you wouldn't necessarily need to do, that someone else could do simply, so that you free up time, even if it is just to relax and to rest and recuperate, because it's so undervalued, I think. And I think previously I've worked 7 days and I've burnt myself out, and I think I'm learning now more and more to give myself a day off, at least a Sunday off if I can. And when it comes to leverage, I think what we forget is that our pyramid structure, your most valuable resource at the top is the most costly resource. So you want to use it for the most effective thing that you do. So I think for us, even in NHS, because there's a lack of support or lack of administrative support or lack of system functionalities, we're so used to just doing everything ourselves because that's what we've been told to do, because we're compensating not just for the lack of ourselves, GPs in the system, but also the lack of everything else that's going wrong and wrong with the system. And we've been so knocked into a mindset of everything must be done by us, we are the only solution to all problem. And I think that's a problem in itself. I think we need to move past that. And I think that's when you realize that you can do a lot more in your time, because most GPs have more than one jobs. I don't know one GP that has one job, right? And they work crazy hours. They're going, working into the evenings, doing emails, etc. But still, at the end of the day, they're only getting money for the time they work. Yeah, whether that's, if you're locuming, you get time per hour, you get wage. If you're salaried, you get time per hour. If you're a partner, yes, maybe, but you're still putting in an X amount of hours to get that, recuperate that income. You can, put out a locum and, focus on running the practice, but you're still running the practice. If you're working for the CCG, again, it's paid per session. So you're changing your time for some money. I think what you have to understand when it comes to leverage is that can only last so long. If something was to happen to you, unfortunately, I know it's pretty dire, but this is the sort of process I've gone through because of how my life and circumstances are, because everything at so many points in my life has depended on me and probably still does. So I have to think along these axes. If something was to happen to me, the highest potential earner in the family, then what happens? Where does the money come from? Because it's going to disappear. Life insurance will pay so much. Critical illness cover will pay so much, but it's still not going to be what we're earning now. And I think that's what led me to want to get out of this box early on. And, I had a very tough childhood. We didn't have a lot of money. And I promised myself I'll never be there again. And that's one of the other reasons why I want to get out of that box. And I think that's why I set out or have always had an entrepreneurial mindset, because what you realize is when it's a business, even for GP practice, for example, you can employ someone else to do the work while you're building the business or the practice, and you can grow the practice. And then that's only where you make or increase your earning potential, increase your value. In some ways, that same thing applies to property, for example. It's not without its hassles, it's not without its lessons. You have to know what you're doing, but once you do, you can, double, triple your income. Whereas if you rely on a day-to-day job, 9 to 5 job, you go to work and you get paid and come back, and that's all that you're ever going to make, and you're never going to develop in some ways what we call financial freedom or passive income, which is a critical part of it. I think that's important, and I think that's why I say when I decided to get that receptionist, service who answers my phone calls rather than me picking up my phone calls. One, I didn't miss the phone calls because I was missing potential clients that I could have made money from. And two, I had time in my day to focus on what I was doing, whether that was being a GP in practice or teaching or whatever, so that I didn't get stressed out trying to, juggle 5 different things in one session, which is beyond expectations of any human being. So it's not just a monetary and value benefit, but it has health benefits and well-being benefits, and we know now that we're all struggling. That's a lie to say no one is. Every GP in the country is struggling to some extent, and we need all the help we can get. And I think that's something that we have to explore for ourselves if no one else would do it for you.
So you've hired somebody as a receptionist. Seems like you're now having to learn other skills, as in hiring people and managing people. What have you learned in that journey?
I tell you what, it's the hardest part of running a business. It's really hard. Again, it's in, I think, was it Rich Dad, Poor Dad? I think it's one of the biggest lessons from that book. It tells you, the biggest struggle in a business is getting good people because they're rare. And then, but again, in some ways, like Branson says, is that you have to train people and treat people so well that they're good enough to leave, but they don't want to leave to some extent. I take that attitude in some ways. So I've taken on people who've just left university to try to help me with their content production, and I'm teaching them how to do it, because over the times I've figured a lot of stuff out, and you forget how much you have as a knowledge that you can pass on to them, and you help develop them, because I think some of it's that person-to-person interaction. I think you never underestimate it. Like Gary Vee says, you appreciate people and you teach them how to do things, and they will be loyal and they will go a mile to help you, and I think that's what you mustn't forget, and that's what I think I still try to do as much as I can. But at some point, I think you do have to outsource it to some extent. And I think as you grow, you learn to put layers in place so that you have someone who manages all of the stuff, and then you have a manager that manages them, and then the manager comes to you for things that are really, really dire and really need your attention, so that over time you learn. But I think it's important that you start off with, at the bottom, learning how to manage people, how to manage time, how to leverage labor in some ways, so that you progress on. So at this moment, I think I'm using a service that does that for me to some extent. So I just have to manage the managers in the service, so they manage the staff in the service now. So I'm one step further away. But I think you never get away from managing people, and you have to learn that. It's a valuable skill. And I think it's hard. It's hard because you have to maintain boundaries, but you also have to be personable. They have to be able to approach you as well. You can't be shut off. It's that common thing, isn't it? A sandwich. You give them a positive feedback, negative feedback, and then you give them something constructive and positive to end on, so that it doesn't sound like a telling off, but that you've part something, and you give them something constructive to go work on and come back to you, so that you can carry on growing. And you have to give people the time and space to grow as well. Autonomy is important, I think. Too many times we're micromanaging people, but it's a fine balance when you're a small business, because you haven't got all the money in the world to play around and let people make mistakes on your money. So it's hard. It's hard. I haven't figured it out. I'm still figuring it out. I'm sure at one point I might be a better employer.
Yeah, it's so difficult to manage people, and we see it in general practice. When a practice is struggling, there's usually people's problem, other GPs leaving, and for the partners, very difficult for them as well. So managing people and treating them well will keep them. So one reframe that's really helpful is thinking about, as an employer, these people are not working for you, but you're working for these people, so that they're staying with you. and they're helping you achieve your own goal. But if you think they're working for you, you tell them what to do, then it's going to be very frustrating for these people. It sounds like you're building your team and you're trying to figure it out. Right now, what are you thinking about your long-term goal?
Building on what we just talked about, so a long-term goal, ideally, I'd like a few clinics and, a few members of staff who are running the business. Then I want to go into, products and scaling the business in other ways as well, so that we can have a further reach and growth. I think that's what everyone wants. But immediately, I think systems. I think we can't underestimate systems. Having a protocol like we do in medicine, protocols and policies, they are so helpful. So I think at the moment I'm developing my systems in some ways of how people's inquiries coming to the clinic and how we end up servicing them and how we follow them up and then how we bring them back in that cycle, because we want to keep that wheel turning. And I think greasing every part of that wheel so it runs as smooth as possible is the best way to, one, make it so efficient that it doesn't cost you too much, that it costs you the right amount to service a client and they have the best outcomes possible. And two, that they tell people and, your business grows. And I think that's what I'm focusing on now. And I think the biggest... the most critical part of that wheel is the step when a new person enters the business or a customer is looking to buy, that sales process. I think that's the most critical part. And I've got a few different options. Again, leverage, you're talking about it. On my website, you can WhatsApp me, the clinic, so you can send some photos and WhatsApp someone. That's open 24 hours and someone will get back to them during mostly day hours, but if I'm free I might get back any other time. The other option is I've got a form online where you can send photos into the clinic, so that again is a lead generation tool. So the photos come in, one of the secretaries or me will give them a call back to chase them up afterwards, so that they can do it in their time and we don't have to be there in our time, so we can follow it in our own time, so that we don't miss those opportunities to market, sell, or bring people or engage with customers. And of course, the other option is they call in or they book themselves online. The online booking system is, I guess, another form of leverage where they book themselves online and they come in and we see them.
At the moment, what's your schedule like on a weekly planner?
At the moment, I'm trying to refine my schedule as to make it more fixed in some ways, so that, again, consistency, isn't it? It's valuable, right? But I think as a still small growing business, I'm being flexible at the moment. So I tend to mostly do appointments on demand, depending, and I'm a little bit flexible with the calendar, etc. So normally I would spend Wednesdays in, for example, Sutton Coldfield Clinic Wednesday afternoons, and most of the other week in between Birmingham and Solihull clinics, mostly Birmingham, that's closer to me, close to my house, so that I can get out there more often. So that's what it looks like at the moment.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us, Thuva. For somebody who is in GP training or just about to go to CCT, what advice would you give to that person who's thinking about a portfolio career? My
advice would be, is never too early to think about it. Start thinking about it, start doing it. Especially in aesthetics, you just have to have a license as a F2, I guess, in some ways, to prescribe your own medicine, so you can do Botox. But you can start at any grade if you just want to do fillers, so there's no earlier time to start. And then I guess the other element of advice is I think it's answering the question as what will keep your fire going for longer. A lot of people do it because it sounds nice and it feels like I might make some money in it, and then those are the people I find that don't survive for long, because you really have to enjoy it to do it. Just like general practice, we choose it because we love that patient engagement, but everything at a fair dose is enjoyable, right? Beyond a certain dose, it becomes toxic to some extent. So I think it's finding that balance right, and you only do that with figures, doing it before you know. And the other, I've said it already. Try everything. Yeah, don't limit yourself to one thing. Try everything well, and then figure out what you want to do, and then stick to it, and go all out. Go put everything into it.
So where can people follow you?
So you can follow me on YouTube, it's Thuva Amuthan. You can follow me on Instagram, Dr Amuthan, and Facebook as well, Dr Amuthan, and LinkedIn as well, Thuva Amuthan. You should be able to find me. Feel free to follow and like.
Thank you for watching this episode until the end. If you got any questions or any comments, please write it down in the comment section. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.